There's a moment every watch collector dreads. Someone notices your watch and asks to see it. They turn it over, smile politely, hand it back, and suddenly the conversation changes. You think they're admiring it, but they are just being polite. They are trying not to tell you that you overpaid, bought the wrong reference, or fell for the marketing. The uncomfortable truth is that some watches don't make experienced collectors think, "Nice watch." They make them think, "He doesn't know." And today, we're looking at those watches that quietly reveal the mistakes behind the purchase. 7. The fashion chronograph with fake subdials. Walk into any mid-range department store, any airport shop, any jeweler running a going out of business sale, and you'll find them. Chronographs with 3 bold subdials. Tachymeter rings. Pushers on the case at 10 and 2 o'clock. The whole visual language of a racing instrument on your wrist for $150, maybe $200. But here's what nobody tells the person picking it up. Look closely at those subdials. Push the buttons. Watch what happens. In most cases, nothing happens. The subdials are printed. They don't move. They exist entirely to make the timepiece look more complicated than it is. This is the fashion chronograph trap, and it has been quietly running for decades. A Fossil store representative confirmed their own tachymeter bezels were just for show in a Watch You Seek thread from 2012 that has been read tens of thousands of times since. A customer bought a Fossil-branded Flight Aviator at $135 with tachymeter numbers prominently printed on the bezel and called the company to ask how to activate the tachymeter function. The answer: there is currently no Fossil timepiece that has tachymeter functionality. The numbers are decoration. The case says aviation instrument. The insides say otherwise. If you own a fashion chronograph, press those pushers right now and tell me what the bottom subdial actually does. Drop it below. I'm curious how many people bought these without ever checking. So, the mechanism that powers a real chronograph costs money to build correctly. A column wheel controls the start, stop, and reset functions. A coupling links the seconds hand to the running train. Vertical clutch systems prevent the hands from jumping on activation. Engineers spent decades refining how these parts interact. A true column wheel mechanical chronograph from an entry-level Swiss brand starts at around $500 for a reason. You cannot get that for $150. So, some brands keep the look and skip the function. You get a 2-hand quartz case dressed up to suggest a 3-register stopwatch. The 2 extra registers are furniture, printed to create an impression of complexity. Picture the 22-year-old buying his first serious timepiece. He wants to look like he understands something. He picks up the Armani Exchange chronograph at $220. The dial face looks spectacular. He wears it for a year. Then someone who actually knows their way around a movement quietly asks if the subdials work. He pushes the chronograph button. Nothing moves. He pushes again. Still nothing. A small, specific humiliation lands in the middle of what was supposed to be a moment of belonging. That's the real damage. Not the money, the assumption. The assumption that looking like a chronograph is the same thing as being one. A 2-hand quartz timepiece is a respectable object. Accuracy is excellent. Maintenance is almost zero. Battery life runs years. There is no shame in quartz. What makes this a trap isn't the movement type. It's the deliberate suggestion of function that isn't there. It's paying for the appearance of an instrument while wearing what is, under the case, a bracelet with hands. Armani Exchange, guess, DKNY, Fossil, all variations on the same premise. All betting that most buyers won't push the buttons before handing over the card. And they're largely right about that bet. The experienced collector looks at a frozen subdial and registers something specific. Not contempt for the buyer, just a very clear picture of what they didn't check. The person who knows the community has a phrase for this category of purchase. They call it buying the costume. You can wear a costume of something without being the thing. A fashion chronograph is a costume of a sports timing instrument. The buyer bought the shape. They didn't get the story. So buy the timepiece for what it actually is. If you want something that looks good and coordinates with your jacket, excellent options exist at this price, from brands honest about what they're selling. The problem isn't the category. The problem is the lie inside the case. And when someone asks a question you can't answer about the thing on your wrist, the timepiece stops being yours in any meaningful sense. A cosmetic chronograph is annoying enough. But the next one doesn't even try to dress it up. It puts a name on the dial and calls it luxury. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 6. Michael Kors at full retail. The strategy is elegant in its simplicity. Put a recognizable fashion name on a case. Price it between $200 and $450. Display it behind glass, next to Gucci belts and Coach bags, and let the brand association do the rest. Buyers walk past it a dozen times. Then, someone's birthday arrives and they want to give something that looks expensive. The timepiece ends up in a box with a bow. Michael Kors accessories, at full retail, do what they say on the surface. The Runway, the Lexington, the Bradshaw, they look clean. Cases are stainless steel, bracelets are polished, the quartz movements keep accurate time. For someone who wants a wrist accessory that coordinates with their bag and runs for 3 years on a battery without any servicing, this is a functional object, and there's nothing wrong with buying one as exactly that. The problem is the positioning, because designer timepiece implies something it doesn't actually deliver. The calibers inside most Michael Kors offerings are standard Japanese quartz, the same movement architecture found in products at a fraction of the retail cost. There's no Swiss manufacturer behind the price. No in-house caliber. No watchmaking heritage being rewarded when someone spends $350 at a department store counter. They're paying for the handbag brand's name on a dial. That is the full transaction. Picture the 25-year-old buying her first grown-up piece as a career milestone. She tells people it's designer, and it is, in the same sense that a Michael Kors tote is designer. But the collector community doesn't classify it as horology. WatchCrunch is blunt about this. I see it so often worn by people who are not into watches and won't know its poor value for money. Said without malice. Said accurately. The RealReal, the luxury resale platform, lists Michael Kors offerings at up to 90% off retail. That's not a clearance event. That's the secondary market, giving an honest answer about what the object is worth when buyers have access to better information. A $350 Kors sells for $35 on the pre-owned market, sometimes less. The gap between full retail cost and secondary value is the gap between the brand's self-presentation and what a buyer with options actually thinks the object is worth the moment they have a choice. For the same budget, a Tissot PRX in quartz, a Hamilton khaki field, a Seiko presage with an exhibition caseback showing the movement underneath. All three put actual watchmaking in the picture rather than marketing. All three have secondary market values that don't immediately collapse to 1/10 of what someone paid. The dumbest version of this purchase isn't buying a Kors as a fashion accessory while knowing exactly what it is. That's a coherent choice. The dumbest version is paying full retail while believing you've bought a proper timepiece with craft behind it. Or giving one as a gift that signals prestige, when everyone at the table who knows the community registers the opposite. The gift says something, it just doesn't say what the buyer intended. So who exactly is this aimed at? The person in the mall who has $250, wants a wrist piece, and walks past the Seiko display case to buy a Kors because the name is louder. That buyer spent the same money and got significantly less object. The name is not the watch. There's a second version of this buyer though. The one who already knows watches, who has a growing collection, who buys the Kors as a gift for someone else. For a partner, a parent, someone who doesn't follow the hobby, but likes nice things. This buyer thinks they're being smart. Recognizable name, decent-looking case, won't get lost in specifications that the recipient won't understand. But they've just bought $35 worth of watch for $350 retail. And if the recipient ever learns what they received, the gift starts to say something different. The lesson here isn't complicated. When the budget is limited, buy something with real watchmaking at that price rather than a fashion name. And when you want to give something special, spend the budget on a real object, not a logo. Kors, at least, is honest about selling you a brand, What comes next sold the illusion of winning a deal. $2,500 for $89. Tonight only. 5. Invicta, the MSRP game. The timepiece is listed at $2,500. You can have it tonight for $89. This isn't a deal. It's arithmetic being used against the buyer, and it has been Invicta's primary commercial strategy for more than 20 years. Here's how the mechanism works. Invicta sets a manufacturer's suggested retail price, a number they invented, that no retailer has ever charged, that no consumer has ever paid at full price, and then permanently marks their products at 70 to 85% below that number. The piece didn't cost $2,500 to manufacture. It isn't worth $2,500 to any informed buyer. The MSRP exists specifically to make the $89 price feel like a windfall. I'm getting a $2,500 timepiece for $89. The buyer tells themselves. The feeling is real. The deal is not. What they're getting is an $89 timepiece. The discount is fictitious. The value is real. The only thing manufactured, beyond the watch itself, is the price it's being discounted from. Watch You Seek was blunt about this. Under no circumstances whatsoever would these watches ever sell for the suggested retail price. A consumer review elsewhere records paying $89 for an Invicta, then being quoted $60 by Invicta's own service center for a battery replacement. Their representative's response when the buyer pointed out the math. Oh well. $60 to change a battery in a piece that sold for $89. The service tariff is pegged to the inflated MSRP, rather than the actual selling cost. Invicta started in 1837 as a Swiss watchmaking company. The Picard family ran it for more than a century, producing respectable mechanical timepieces that held their place among the respectable mid-tier names of the Swiss industry. But in 1991, American investors acquired the brand and repositioned it around television shopping. Shop NBC, Shop HQ, the late-night format built around countdown timers, expiring deals, and the visceral thrill of getting something for almost nothing. That repositioning is where the MSRP fiction became the brand's core architecture. And then the legal dimension that most buyers never hear about. A 2025 lawsuit filed by the parent company of Shop HQ alleged 9 fraudulent transfers totaling $7 million to Invicta Watch Co., with dealings structured to disproportionately favor Invicta, while CEO Eyal Lalo sat on the shopping network's board. Shop HQ subsequently laid off nearly all staff and shuttered its Eden Prairie, Minnesota studio. Some of the final Shop HQ YouTube live streams, broadcast from near-empty offices, still featured Invicta pieces being sold at their usual discount-from-nothing structure. A Quora answer on why Invicta is always discounted summarizes the commercial logic plainly. Invicta knows its customers are not watch enthusiasts, not collectors, not people who will cross-reference the MSRP against any external price source. The strategy is a long-running bet against the buyer's knowledge. And commercially, for more than 20 years, the bet paid off. The Pro Diver is worth naming as a partial exception. At $70 to $100, with a Seiko NH35 movement and genuine water resistance, it's an honest product at an honest cost. The homage to Rolex Submariner aesthetics is conspicuous, but the piece does what it claims at the cost it charges. That's a defensible purchase. But the luxury reserve line, the MSRP fiction, the television urgency mechanism, the psychological structure that implies you're beating the system when you're just buying an $89 item for $89. That's the operation. And the dumbest version of it is the person who thinks they won. Which piece did you spend the most on that turned out to be the worst value? Invicta sells a number. The next one sells a name. An Audemars Piguet name. Just not the Audemars Piguet the community is actually fighting to buy. 4. The app Royal Oak Offshore, bought as a status substitute. There's a specific thing the collector community says when they see someone wearing the offshore and trying to signal the same social currency as the Royal Oak. They don't say it to the buyer's face. They say it to each other in a different room. Gerald Genta's 1972 Royal Oak is the object that people who understand Audemars Piguet actually want. The 41mm time-only reference, the caliber 7000, 121, the tapisserie dial, the octagonal bezel with its 8 exposed screws, the integrated bracelet tapering into the lugs in a way most brands still haven't replicated after 50 years of trying. It sits under a shirt cuff. It works at a board presentation and a Saturday farmer's market. The secondary market tells the truth about how it's valued. The stainless steel 15500ST trades at or above retail because genuine demand consistently exceeds what Audemars Piguet's roughly 50,000 annual units can supply. The Royal Oak Offshore launched in 1993. Emmanuel Guait, then 22 years old, was asked by AP management to reimagine the Royal Oak for a younger audience at a time when the original sales had been declining. He enlarged the case to 42 millimeters, added rubber crown guards, made the megatapisserie dial chunkier and more contrasted, thickened the chronograph pushers. AP's then head of design reportedly called the result the Beast. The nickname stuck in ways that revealed something about internal ambivalence toward the project. Then the Offshore became culturally famous in a way the original never quite managed with a mass audience, because the people who wore it publicly were athletes and musicians who liked loud, large, and visible. Arnold Schwarzenegger collaborated on editions tied to his films. Football players made it a wrist fixture in a decade when football players' wrists were being photographed constantly. The timepiece that collectors treated as the louder, less refined sibling of the original became the one with the higher public profile. So the buyer who knows Audemars Piguet by reputation rather than by study buys the Offshore. It's the one they recognize. The bigger one. The one that reads expensive at a social distance. The one they've seen on wrists they think they understand. Here's what the secondary market says about that logic in 2026. Per Watch Guy's 2026 Buyer's Guide, the current generation 43mm chronographs with the Cal 4,401 are trading below retail on the secondary market right now. The piece retailing for $35,000 can be purchased used, like new, for $22,000 to $28,000. The person who paid full retail, believing they'd bought something as coveted as the Royal Oak, just received an honest answer from the open market. To be specific about what the buyer does get at that cost, the Caliber 4401 is a legitimate in-house movement with column wheel chronograph function, flyback capability, and a 72-hour power reserve. The case construction is exceptional. The Offshore is not a bad timepiece. The issue isn't the object itself. The issue is what the buyer thought the object communicated. They thought it said, "I own an AP." What it says to the community is, "I own the AP that's available at retail without a purchase history." Because the Offshore is the one you can walk into the boutique and actually buy. There is a specific reason for that. The collector community knows what the reason is. The person buying the Offshore to signal the same status as the Royal Oak doesn't. That gap is visible on the wrist, at 30 feet, to anyone who has spent real time in this space. There's something almost painful about the way this works. The buyer paid $35,000 to announce something. The announcement was heard, clearly, by everyone at the table. It just said the wrong thing. The collector, who has both references, understands the difference immediately. The Offshore chronograph is larger, louder, more complicated, technically more expensive to produce. It has more going on. And yet, within the community, the status hierarchy inverts. The simpler watch, the thinner watch, the one that costs less to produce and retails for less, is the one everyone is trying to get. Because scarcity is only partly about supply, it's about desire, and desire follows knowledge. The person who doesn't know the community buys the watch that looks like the bigger statement. The buyer who does know the community buys the watch that requires knowing something to understand. That gap between what looks impressive on the outside and what is impressive to the people on the inside is what this entry is really about. That buyer thought they were buying into a community. They bought the version of the ticket that gets you to the door but not through it. The Offshore at least buys you real craft at a genuine cost. What comes next is paying luxury prices for 5 batteries and a diamond case. 3. Jacob and CO. Jacob Arabo launched the 5 time zone in 2002 from his jewelry store in New York's Diamond District. The premise was clear. Show 5 simultaneous time zones on one dial. New York, Los Angeles, Paris, Tokyo, And one more of your choosing. Celebrities caught on immediately. Jay-Z wore one, Diddy wore one, Allen Iverson wore one. The piece became the wrist equivalent of a VIP table. Wearing it said you moved across continents often enough that 5 simultaneous time zones was a practical requirement rather than an aspiration. That cultural moment was real. But the movement specification tells a different story. 5 separate Swiss ETA quartz calibers. When the power runs out, you're dealing with a service job on 5 separate ETA calibers inside one case. You're not buying high watchmaking. You're buying 5 cheap timepieces engineered into one expensive case, set with diamonds, retailing at $15,000 and above for the standard steel models. A Watch You Seek thread on which luxury brands lose the most value gave a quick answer. That's an easy one. Jacob & Co. Their quartz 5-time zone pieces regularly lose 80 to 90% of their value. The person paying $15,000 for a steel 5-time zone will sell it used for $1,500 to $2,000. The diamonds hold more value than the horological content. In every meaningful sense of that sentence, the celebrity association matters more than the engineering, and both depreciate faster than a mechanical piece from a brand with actual collector demand behind it. There is a version of Jacob & Co. that serious collectors discuss with real interest: the Astronomia, the multi-axis tourbillon rotating on 3 planes simultaneously, the miniature celestial sphere suspended at the center of the case, the 572-component movement built entirely in-house. That is something unusual in this industry. Not a marketing claim, but an engineering fact. Nothing else quite like it exists at any cost. The Astronomia has a defensible argument. The 5-time zone has 5 ETA quartz batteries in a diamond case, and it carries the cultural weight of a specific era in hip-hop and celebrity culture that the collector market has moved past. Chrono 24's 2025 market recap showed collectors shifting toward dress references, rectangular cases, refined aesthetics, Cartier tanks, Vacheron dress pieces. Vacheron Constantin market share grew 13% year over year. The market that made the 5-time zone symbolically significant has moved on to something quieter. The piece is now a period artifact. Somewhere, someone bought a 5-time zone in 2004 because they'd seen Jay-Z wearing one. It looked exactly right for that moment in time. The diamonds caught the light in a specific way. The 5 dials looked like they were solving a problem worth solving. Today, the piece sits in a drawer. 3 of the 5 batteries are dead. Replacing them requires a service center that handles Jacob & Co., and not every city has one. You're not servicing one movement. You're servicing 5 calibers in one case for a quartz watch. And the piece says something specific on the wrist in 2025 that it didn't say in 2004. In 2004, it said, "I move between continents, and I want you to know that." In 2025, it says, "I bought this in 2004. To anyone paying close attention, those are very different sentences. Jacob & Co. at least made the piece loud enough that you knew what you were getting. The next brand convinced an entire generation it was selling art. The art wasn't even theirs. 2. Movado museum piece at full retail. A black dial, a single hand, 1 gold dot at 12 o'clock, representing the sun at noon. That's the entire design. The Museum of Modern Art added a Movado museum reference to its permanent collection in 1960. For 60 years since, Movado has built its entire commercial identity around that credential. Sophisticated, minimalist, worthy of an art institution. And it is beautiful, no argument. But here is what the marketing doesn't mention. Nathan George Horwit designed that dial in 1947. He was an industrial designer, not a watchmaker. His concept was reduction. Strip the clock face to its essential information. 1 dot where the sun sits at noon. 1 hand moving around it. No hour markers. No numerals. Time as an impression rather than an instruction. He submitted the original prototype to the MoMA. The MoMA accepted it. And then, in the early 50s, the Zenith Movado entity began producing timepieces carrying that design. Without asking Horwit, without compensating him, without crediting him, Horwit sued. In 1975, Movado settled with Nathan George Horwit for $29,000. They kept the design. They own it now. But the dial that Movado's entire modern identity rests on wasn't born in their workshops. It was taken from a designer who spent nearly 3 decades fighting to be acknowledged and settled for $29,000 when he ran out of resources. Horwit died in 1990. After his death, Movado ramped up the museum watch marketing considerably, promoting Horwit's name as a selling point. The man they fought for nearly 3 decades became, posthumously, their best marketing asset. A WatchCrunch contributor who'd researched this history wrote, "When Movado stole the museum design from Nathan George Horwit, they lost their credibility as a serious watchmaker for many. Building what would be their entire legacy on IP theft will always taint their legacy." Then there is the movement. Most Movado museum references run Ronda quartz calibers. A Swiss supplier, yes, but mass-produced quartz found in far less expensive objects. At $400 to $900 for the higher-end steel bracelet variants, the buyer is paying primarily for the brand name and the black dial. The Watch You Seek community verdict is concise: the ultimate one-trick pony. Overpriced quartz fashion timepieces. A more measured voice on the same forum. A good, mostly quartz watch offered at a price that makes it a middle-class aspirational brand. Not junk, just not what the MoMA branding implies. Do you own a Movado museum piece? Did you know the Horwit story before buying it? What makes this the #1 entry isn't simply overpriced quartz. It's that the gap here is the widest of anything on this list, because the museum piece is beautiful. On the wrist, in a room full of people who don't collect, it projects exactly what it's supposed to. Sophisticated. Art adjacent. A WatchCrunch member who had since moved to much more serious pieces wrote something honest. "No timepiece I have ever owned, including what some would consider grail pieces, ever received as many compliments as the museum piece. From people who just look at a wrist and respond to what they see, it works. The design is so clean, so resolved, so visually confident that it reads as expensive to anyone who doesn't know the story behind it. But the collector who sees it knows the dial's history. They know whose design it is and how it got from Horwit's drawing board into Movado's permanent catalog. They know what a Ronda quartz caliber costs to source. They know that this $900 reference will sell for under $200 pre-owned, because the secondary market knows what's inside. The person paying full retail is buying a feeling, museum-worthy, culturally gravitated, tasteful. And on the wrist, the object does produce that feeling very well. The museum piece succeeds at making the buyer feel a certain way. It just doesn't tell them the full story of how the design was acquired, what's inside the case, or what the object is worth the moment they walk out of the shop. That gap between the feeling and the facts is the widest on this list. That's why it's #1. Here's a thought that keeps surfacing when I look at this one. The museum piece receives more compliments than many timepieces that cost 5 times as much. The design works. Nathan George Horwit produced something that is still stopping people on the street in 2025. Nearly 80 years after he sketched it. That's extraordinary. That's a reflection of his work, not Movado's. Which is the particular cruelty of this entry. The design deserves the compliments. It just deserves to carry the name of the person who made it. Instead, it carries the name of the company that fought him for nearly 3 decades and paid him $29,000 to go away. The person buying at full retail in 2025 is funding that outcome. The least you can do is know the story. Know what you're wearing. Know whose idea it was. And know that the next time someone compliments the museum piece on your wrist, the right answer is, it was designed by Nathan George Horwit in 1947. Look him up. He spent his life creating things. He never got rich from any of them. This one you're wearing is the one everybody knows. Every piece on this list runs the same operation. It bets the buyer won't ask the right questions. The collectors who've been doing this for 20 years don't feel superior about any of it. They feel grateful. Almost all of them owned a version of one of these pieces at some point. That's usually how the education starts. You wear it. Someone asks you to push the button. The subdial doesn't move, and you start asking questions you should have asked at the counter. But now you don't have to go through that path. You can get collecting right from the get-go. So what do you think? Smash that like button and subscribe.